Hi, everybody. It's Dan.
And Ron. And if you're having a little trouble understanding Dan, it's because he's eating a piece of toast. I finished my piece of toast already, but I can pretend. So I know in previous times we've eaten some food or made sounds that may be hard to tell. We do occasionally eat while we're recording. And if you may have noticed some crinkling on a previous episode, it's because I was eating a bunch of Kit Kats left over from Dan and Elizabeth
Halloween party, yeah.
Thank you. I don't know how to say Halloween. So, anyways,
so a long time no see.
Yeah, it's been probably days.
Yeah, a couple days.
But so today we saw two things. We saw the 1968 classic Barbarella, B-movie classic.
B-movie classic. And we also watched the Super Friends episode Attack of the Cats, which I feel like was the most straightforward Super Friends that we've tackled in a couple of weeks, because it was just kind of, they become cats and then they're not cats. It was pretty
Yeah, and it really does. It has a beginning, middle, and end. Doesn't start in media res, which is the ones that I like when they open that way.
Right. Nobody kills all of Krypton to save the Super Friends.
Yeah, none of this time warp and all the rules around time travel and none of that stuff. It was very simple and straightforward. Oh, and this time we flipped it around a bit and we watched Super Friends first. So it was like watching the animated short before the feature.
So we watched Barbarella by Roger Vadim, also the director of And God Created Woman and the person who introduced Brigitte Bardot to international audiences, and a couple other very attractive blonde women throughout the 1950s through 70s, I believe. Classic B-movie.
Classic B-movie. Sure. No one can ever accuse this of being
an A movie for sure.
Of an A movie, yeah. This isn't the classic A movie. This isn't in what was it, the AFI's top 100 all time or something like that. But it is in the top 100 all time of B movies.
Oh, for sure, yeah. And it was sort of an interesting thing to watch after watching Listomania last week. Just because superficially, I feel like they share a lot of traits. Like they're both kind of sex obsessed, made within 7 years of each other, both very much products of like the hippie culture, the free love thing, etc. Except they could not be two more fundamentally different movies.
Yeah.
And I guess like this movie, it's like very obviously, it's almost as if the script is purposely dumbed down lest you might think it was about something else besides showing off a young Jane Fonda's body.
Should we? Oh, sorry, you're in the middle of a...
Well, spoiler alert, Jane Fonda is in the movie.
Right.
You get to see a lot of her body.
In case you've heard of the movie and did not hear that Jane Fonda is in it. Yeah. Should we talk about the plot? Sorry, just you mentioned the script and I realized what's the story.
What is it? Okay, so Barbarella, a.k.a. Jane Fonda, lives in a room covered in wall-to-ceiling shag carpeting.
And spends an hour and a half there. No.
Yeah, spends a very long time there. And
she's an astronaut, so that's actually a spaceship that she's on with the wall-to-wall shag carpeting. But it's basically a room.
Yeah, and Earth has become Krypton before it blew up. People solve everything with pills. They have sex by taking a pill and then just holding their hands together for a long time, which we get to see a little bit later in the movie, which is fun.
And it sounds like while they have their hands clasped against each other, right? Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Holding hands, there's the sound of popcorn popping, and then the equivalent of an orgasm is they shake a little bit and their hair pops up.
Right, and this is like very obviously the movie that Woody Allen was making fun of, or probably had in his head when he created the Orgasmatron in Sleeper.
Yeah, I kept thinking of the Orgasmatron as the name of one of the things in here. I was conflating two pieces of this and giving it the wrong name.
Right, because the Orgasmatron is just like a big pod. They go in the pod and then they come out and their hair is all frizzy.
Yeah. So
So that, and I mean, that was, I feel like I haven't seen a lot of late 60s, like kind of junky, cheesy sci-fi movies. So I didn't necessarily pick up, because there's like a ton of movie references in Sleeper, but the ones I picked up were like old silent comedies and stuff, but not necessarily to movies that would have been contemporary to because Sleeper was 73, I think. And there's definitely a little bit of like making fun of Jane Fonda's outfits in this, with like how Diane Keaton ends up, or what Diane Keaton's storyline ends up being in Sleeper.
Right.
Okay, so
she's in the shag-carpeted one-room spaceship. It turns out that the universe is at peace. The universe is at peace. There is no war. There is only love. And even when the president and Barbarella greet each other, they hold their hand up and say love. Right. And that's it. So, she sent out a mission. The scientist Duran Duran, after which the band is named, Duran Duran, he invented the positronic ray, which is a terrible weapon. And why would you create a weapon? I know, why would you do that? Right, the universe is at peace. Yeah. So, and he ran off to Tau Ceti. So she's sent over there to recapture Duran Duran.
Last time, I promise. Of crinkly noises.
Oh, right. So these crinkly noises were from a bag of candy corn. So she goes over to Tau Ceti. She meets an angel, really. It's the guy who's the last of his race. He barely wears a loincloth, and he has giant wings. He's like a religiously amped up version of like Dr. Frankenfurter's creation in Rocky Horror, basically. Completely with glistening chests, constantly glistening.
Well, that's like, because she ends up on the ice planet first, and she meets this guy who's like, how like you and I are 80% water, and this guy's like 80% chest hair, because I guess that's how humankind evolved to deal with the tundra. And he fixes her spaceship, and then she's like, "What can I do to repay you?" And he's like, "You can make love to me right now." And then she's like, "Oh, well, here's the pill." And then he's like, "No, we must make love my way." And apparently she's never had what I always thought was just sex, but
some sort of, something from the distant past, from Earth's ancient past.
Right, apparently in this future, like sex is like collecting vinyl records or something. And, or as we look PIV, I guess, because I don't want to like say that the palm touching, I don't want to like sex shame the fictional future people, but
and it's quite possible that something that involves some sort of pill or some sort of external substance can create a sensation that's even better than sex. But that's for future generations to discover. Well,
and she gets
current generations.
She gets attacked by these weird little children who try to have dolls eat her, but when the dolls try to eat her clothing just becomes more flimsy, basically. And that happens
a lot,
at least 3 times, right? Like, just she's stuck somewhere, things like start half-heartedly chewing on her, and she comes out, her clothing's all torn up.
It's all torn up, and then she switches into another outfit.
Right.
For some reason, there's just lots of outfits all over the planets, just waiting for her.
It's like the entire universe is her Cher concert, like. But yeah, I mean, Jane Fonda, man, and this movie was rated PG.
It was?
It was rated PG, I believe, because they didn't have an R rating in 1968.
Really? No, I didn't realize that R was so relatively.
Like PG-13 was because I think
PG-13 was the mid-80s.
That was very recent. Yeah,
that was mid-80s, because that was in response to Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and Gremlins. I remember when that came out. I'm that old that I remember when PG-13 was created, and I remember seeing those movies in the theater.
But at least the way I understood it was when they first got away from the Hays Code and moved into the rating system, it was pretty much G for general audiences, PG for there should be a parent there.
Okay.
And then, X and XXX for like pornographic films, which I don't believe were generally sent to a ratings board outside of that brief period of porno chic in the early 70s with Devil and Miss Jones and what was.
So wait, does that mean that they were automatically treated as XXX if they weren't submitted?
No, but it would be released as unrated,
Okay.
which only certain movie houses would agree to play unrated. It was kind of like the comics rating system, right? It was like the industry decided to impose self-censorship to avoid outside interference, and like you could release comic books that were not approved by the Comics Code. Now the Comics Code is basically dead as far as I understand it. But for a long time, yes, you could release a comic that wasn't approved by the Comics Code, but you couldn't get any kind of distribution at newsstands or grocery stores, which were the primary form of distribution. And to go back to our discussion many episodes ago when we were looking at Ron's comics, the establishment of the direct market, aka like comic book exclusive stores that were meant to entirely sell comics in the late 70s, early 80s, meant that there was actually an outlet where you could put out stuff that wasn't Comics Code approved. That was part of what led to Ronin, Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen, Vigilante, for anybody who remembers that. That was a DC series. Anything direct market usually wouldn't have the Comics Code stamp on it.
Even if it was something like Spider-Man? Was there a separate...
Well, no, because Spider-Man, it would have the Comics Code stamp on it. There would be a newsstand and a direct market version, but there wouldn't be... basically, Spider-Man's still, a lot of that would have been sold through drugstores, newsstands, supermarkets, etc. And so the direct market stores, they would sell Spider-Man, but the stuff that they would get as exclusives were these kind of like new, more quote-unquote mature, I don't want to say necessarily more sophisticated, but, you know, there's like boobs and violence at a certain point, and you could only sell those en masse in the way that you would need to if you were a company like Marvel or DC to direct market stores, aka comic book stores.
Right. So Barbarella.
Barbarella.
All right. So like, good time to switch back. So she's on the ice planet, and then she ends up on the, I don't know what then she ends up on the main planet, right? I don't know what it.
Yeah, she ends up in like the prison colony of the main planet. The main planet has declared itself evil and has explicitly evil, and has quote unquote banished all the good things to this large stone labyrinth, which I thought was a really impressive set. That was probably my favorite. Like when there's that first, and you could tell they could only afford to film like 3 seconds of this, but because it had to be a scale model. There's no way that they actually built this thing, but enormous wooden labyrinth. And she gets stuck in there. Her spaceship's broken. She meets an angel who can't fly. He says that it's because of a health problem. This kind of creepy old man who keeps putting like a test tube beaker, whatever thing on his head for no discernible reason.
So it looks kind of like a big shot glass.
Yeah. It looks like a double shot glass or like a narrow tumbler or something. Mm-hmm. And he's like, no, it's not a physical problem. It's a problem with morale. And, you know, she's figured out the deal with the last guy with all the body hair. And so, although we don't see, we do see the cut down. So they cut out, I don't know if it's the VHS tape that I have, because I feel like they cut out some slivers of the opening scene where she's floating around naked in the space pod.
Oh, where it kind of just jumps, like in one scene, you're looking at it straight on, and it suddenly jumps from the right side to the left side, or
yeah, I feel like there were small cuts for the VHS mark, because we were watching this on a VHS tape from 1991 that I have just had sitting around as decoration in my apartment because I've never actually seen the movie.
Well, so now what you're saying is we need to see the Blu-ray remastered 4K edition.
I don't think.
And then watch it. They cut out the same thing.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that. I imagine this is probably free on YouTube somewhere or something. You could figure out pretty quickly, like, did they cut this stuff? But anyway, she meets this angel. He's blind, and she's like, morale problem. I can fix that. I mean, it also doesn't hurt that he basically looks like a large naked male model, essentially.
Yeah,
but he's also helpless like a puppy dog. So he's kind of like the inverted, like safe male female sexual fantasy thing, right? Because like the guy going through the midlife crisis, he's always looking for like the like the stacked woman that doesn't have a will of her own, and she finds the male equivalent of that. And
I'm trying to think of more, let's say, appropriate ways of saying. But go on.
I mean, I'm not trying to. I'm not condoning this. I'm just saying this is a thing people fantasize about and/or do.
The word stacked. Well, both. But
I mean, he's like dude stacked.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know, I'm equal opportunity stacking here. But anyway, so
will objectify anyone.
Yeah,
which this movie does a lot of.
Yeah, and it's kind of. I mean, it's definitely more comfortable with its female objectification than say like the Listomania. Ken Russell, I think, just likes sex organs because they're just.
And specifically,
he never met a sex organ he didn't like.
Right.
Sometimes literally, I mean, there's like that literal dick organ in the church, basically. But
there's phallic symbols everywhere.
Oh yeah, everything. The world is built on like dicks, like literally in Ken Russell's universe. Not the case in this movie, probably just because they didn't have the money for it. But anyway, so she finds this angel. He doesn't really have a will of his own. He doesn't want to fly until he has sex with Jane Fonda. We see her. Which she
just learned on that ice planet. So this is only now her second
PIV.
time.
So like the stuff that we're going to be renouncing in the future in favor of Tic Tacs and some kind of like sexual version of how they blow up people's heads in scanners, basically. So wait, have you seen Scanners?
I don't remember.
Oh wait, no, you're not. Yeah, you're not a horror movie guy, though, right?
Yeah.
I still feel like we should cover that at some point because, like,
right.
My friend was the star in it, and he destroys the internet at the end by staring at a payphone and using his mind powers. And I've never let him live that down.
Oh, that's great. Okay, yeah. Okay, I'm up for that.
It's a little bit gory with the head exploding, but it's also got Patrick McGoohan.
Oh, all right. That's reason enough to watch it.
Yeah, and apparently Patrick McGoohan was very drunk on set, but that's just like being the goo hand, you know.
Yeah. You talked about that before about him just being drunk, walking on set, speaking, acting all his lines like beautifully, and then going back off.
And just like I'm number 6. Anyway, so they
who is number 2? I don't want to say the rest.
We see her post-coital in this honestly pretty grungy-looking bird's nest because he's an angel, but he lives in a bird's nest because he's got wings. And she's like...
Does he regurgitate worms into her mouth?
Maybe that's what they cut.
Oh,
that's why we just cut straight to her laying. I mean, she's basically laying in a pile of hay with like slightly hidden pieces of what I can only presume are like bird shit, right? Like it looks kind of
angel shit.
Yeah, it looks like the barnyard equivalent of wall-to-wall shag carpeting. Anyway, so voila, sex with a young Jane Fonda apparently, unlike Red Bull, actually gives you wings, and she. The two of them fly together. It's very obvious they're just kind of standing. There's a lot of back projection in this movie. Like, I would say a solid maybe half of this movie is people standing in front of a back projector screen. And they kind of wiggle back and forth in front of the screen to make it look like she's flying. And then they fly into the other part of this planet, which is where these kind of evil, quote-unquote, hedonists live, and suck down, quote, essence of man in a thing that looks like a giant hash pipe. Also, she meets like the
Dildano? Is that no?
Well, she meets Dildano later, but she meets this guy claiming to be like second in command to, quote unquote, the great tyrant who we never see, but they all call him the Great Tyrant, or
him or her, or is it definitely male? Because
I guess they don't really. Queen. Well, there's the Black Queen, but she's not the Great Tyrant, though. I thought.
Okay.
Or maybe
we haven't reached the Black Queen. This is
Did I mention that Jane Fonda looks really hot in this movie? Anyway. That's the main plot point.
We do see her in the opening scene. Actually, in the opening credits, we see her floating around. We see her taking off her spacesuit. And then all of the clothes that she had underneath, and we see her floating around. There's no gravity, so we see her floating around naked. except that the opening credits are animated, and they're strategically animated and kind of the letters jumping around so that they cover key parts of her body. So,
which is funny because they just outright show boobs later in the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe there's like a limit to how many boobs you could show and still get the PG.
Right. This definitely would have been an R.
Right. And then when she gets the assignment from the leader of Earth or whatever, she's like, oh, let me put something on. And he's like, no, you don't need to do something that rash. This is just a matter of state, which I imagine is actually probably how the White House runs now. But anyway, so she's, to go back where we were, she's in the evil part of the planet. She's wandering around, her and the bird angel, whatever dude. They get captured because, like, the angel dude was not supposed to get out of the labyrinth, and they get sent. Where do they get sent first?
I don't remember.
Like, they walk through this wall because they're getting accosted by people who are like, oh, an earthling. And I mean, everybody on the planet looks exactly like she is, so I don't know how they can tell she's an earthling, but whatever.
Yeah, they all look human, or they all are all human, and as
except the guy with the really fake-looking wings. They all look, and I mean, he still looks very human, but
he's a human with wings.
And like questionable sex organs. Because at one point, it's very obviously supposed to be implied that he had like dirty, wild sex with Jane Fonda, aka Barbarella. Yeah. But then later in the movie, some other woman tries to have sex with him, and it's like the best line of the movie.
An angel isn't love. No. An angel
doesn't make love. An angel is love. Yeah. But then what happened to Barbarella, right?
Right. Well, Barbarella's different. Barbarella's special. And Barbarella, as we learn, is innocent. So this is all innocent sex that she has. There is nothing in the least bit tawdry.
I guess because she's not on the pill.
Yeah. Well, no, she is at one point.
Oh, yeah,
she gets off the pill by having, sex, the penetrative sex that we are currently familiar with.
So I guess the moral of the movie is that all the thrill of sex and the remnants of humanity are just like very uncomfortably intertwined with pregnancy risk.
Wait, how does that fit into this?
Well, I mean, what other pill could they be talking about, right? If there's like any kind of coherent symbol system in this movie.
Oh, so taking when did the pill come out?
Pretty sure the pill was out by then. Some form, maybe. That's an errata. That's definitely an errata.
Well, now I'm really curious. Okay, 1960, the first oral contraceptive. Okay, so 1960 is the first oral contraceptive.
And this came out in 68, so the pill would have been a very hot subject.
Yeah, and we're talking about the height of the sexual revolution and all that. We've got, is it second wave feminism?
Generally it's called second wave feminism, yeah. I mean, that went into like the mid. I mean, I guess it's like it's hard to say like it ended at a specific point because it's more a set of attitudes. Yeah. But like,
when would you say roughly started?
Well, I'd say second wave feminism probably starts in like the 1950s.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's.
I had to say because like it's sort of
by this time it's full steam ahead.
Yeah, it's like when the U.S. public or the politically aware U.S. public started actually deeply or shallowly engaging with Marx and Freud, essentially, because you can basically divide second wave feminism into Marxo-Freudian, Marxo-feminism and Freudo-feminism. A lot of the third wave stuff, which is, I would argue, is like basically post-feminism, because a lot of it's just about problematizing ideas of gender generally, and that's the huge bone of contention between second and third wave feminism, because the second wave feminists were not happy about third wave feminism, at least the way that I'm defining it, because of the fact that from the Marxo-feminist side of things, they saw their power as women banding together under the identity women and gaining power through numbers to change their situation through their bargaining power or disruptive capabilities as women. Of course, somebody like Judith Butler comes along, and they also saw like things like drag shows as essentially being like misogyny, like a coded misogyny, which obviously is very different reading than most contemporary feminists would give on that. A lot of that being due to Judith Butler, people like that. But yeah, so they put their eggs in the basket of we all need to assert that we're women and assert that forcefully. And so the idea of breaking down the kind of gender barrier into different categories to them was seen as basically a way to divide and conquer the movement to make sure that women never actually got power.
Okay.
Germaine Greer, that was the name. Like, Germaine Greer has said a lot of very incredibly offensive things about transsexuals and transvestites in the last 5 years to this effect. And she was one of the major writers in the early 70s in the second wave. So she wrote The Female Eunuch is her most famous book.
Transgender, not transsexual. Or is that the term that it's an outdated term?
Any of it, basically.
No. I meant the term transsexual is no longer used as transgender. But was she using, or the person that you were just saying, did they use the term transsexual still? I'm just curious.
I mean, I'm sure she probably used the word tranny. I mean, okay. she was not about being polite. I think she's still alive, but basically she said very, very, very offensive stuff about this to the effect of like, I think a lot of them also read it as like, oh, if you're a man and you're dressing in drag, or you're a man and you think you're a woman, they read it as sort of like if I was going to put on blackface and say I was black right now. Okay. That's how Germaine Greer reads gender problematizing and whatnot. The world has not really, thankfully the world chose the sensible side of that argument. I think or at least part of the part of the world that isn't just trying to be reactionary and backwards for the sake of being so, has come to a much different understanding of those things. God, I mean, I argued with a professor a lot about this stuff in college.
but so going back to Barbarella, so the whole thing about the pill is we've got an oral. The pill is popular. Sexual revolution. The pill frees you up to have as a woman, at least, to have as much sex as you want, except for those. Well, I was going to say
before
those
STDs became clearly known, and that's why like the whole AIDS scare in the 80s is kind of seen as the definitive end of any kind of remnants of the sexual revolution.
Yeah. No more listomania, no more Barbarella. Although no, in Barbarella we see what's interesting, we see the safe sex, but it's not the fun sex. The fun sex, which is people fondling and penetrating each other, for lack of I don't know how to describe,
right.
I don't want to just say the sex we know now, but because there's many ways that we know of now. But yeah, that I
mean, it seems like in the movie it's pretty much penis and vagina. Like there's a little bit of hinting that she's going to do some like girl stuff with the Black Queen, but it never happens. It's
a bit of a teaser there. Oh yeah. But so now she's going back. So there's a pill in which suddenly there's no risk of pregnancy or STDs
or even emotional discomfort, right? Because early on she says like, oh, we have to take a psychocardiogram to make sure we're 100% compatible with the person before we have the hand sex.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that definitely ties into a lot of like people are very hesitant to move away from what they perceive as being natural, even though most of what they perceive as being natural is basically just a product of historical or aesthetic trends, right? Like, and so I think the idea of like, and also I don't think the guy who directed this movie was necessarily very smart. So
what do you mean?
I mean, it's a fucking stupid movie. Like,
okay.
Like, I mean, like the guy is not thinking about this stuff, and like he's not like arguing with somebody in a grad school about this stuff before he makes the movie. He's like, I found a hot lady. Here's some of my ideas about sex. And so, that whole idea of like, and the hippie movement, I think, starts this new romanticism of like, oh, we go back to nature. Nature will take care of us. The dark side of that is stuff like anti-vaxxers or people thinking of like the pill as, oh, science entering the sphere of love. We can't let cold science enter the sphere of love, instead of like, oh, okay, women aren't stuck with this huge financial burden every time they want to get laid with the, potential child scares, right? Because like pregnancy was basically used as a means to financially control women for a very long time, like thousands of years. To the point of like, I mean, I could get into the whole witch scare thing. Is basically the witch scare was essentially invented as a way to control women's reproductive capabilities when they needed farm labor by stigmatizing potentially sexually active women who are not within the reproductive window age-wise. That's a whole other discussion. But yeah, so there's definitely some of that, like, oh man, if it's not completely bareback, then it's not really love, right? And I think that was definitely, if the pill that they're talking about in the film is supposed to match up with the birth control pill, I think that's what it's trying to get across.
Yeah. Although it's confused, because where Barbarella is really, maybe, I want to say I would argue that, but saying I would argue something that involves this movie seems pretty highfalutin. But I would say that it's kind of going. The movie's confused because she ends up having quote unquote regular sex instead of the pill. She prefers that, or that seems to be sort of the preferred mode.
She prefers that because she's like a gorgeous corn-fed American woman, as the French producers probably referred to her. How you say that in French?
But she was quite happy beforehand with the pill. Except now her sexual liberation is to effectively go off the pill.
Right. I mean, unless the pill is supposed to be some kind of catch-all metaphor for social conformity pressure in the 1950s, which granted was very, like, it had to get very restrictive in order for this sudden burst of, like, we're going to do whatever, blah, blah, blah kind of stuff that happened in the late 60s. Like, you go from this post-war idea of the nuclear family and being king and owning a house to, everybody's sleeping with everybody and we all want to go start a commune. We're all going to do drugs. We're all going to do this, that, and the other thing. And you have to have like a very square decade for that to happen. Afterwards is an eruption.
But this, what this movie is really just saying is sex is good. Sex is fun. I mean, even the pill isn't such a bad. Well, the pill, I don't think really after all this discussion, it probably doesn't really. It's not a stand-in for the pill. It just, that's just the way to have sex. It's a sanitized sex
perversion, right? Because the guy, like Dan Dildo or whatever his name is in the movie,
Dildano.
Okay, yeah. He, like, now I'm thinking about every representation of technology in this film is essentially about it being ineffective or somehow perverse, right? Because, like, Dildano, who is the head of the quote-unquote resistance in the evil world, whatever it's called, she offers to have sex with him, and he's like, oh, I want to have the pill sex. I've been waiting forever for this moment.
I've had this pill for 5 years. I want to finally use it.
And everything where he's using technology is shown as being horribly bumbling and ineffective. He can't find the quote-unquote invisible key, which I don't want to say that any of that stuff is necessarily a direct metaphor for the clitoris, but he's not portrayed to be this, like, sexually virile He-Man like every other man in the movie, except for the other guy who attempts to use technology to do sex, which is, what's his face? The guy that looks like, he looks like the Penguin in Batman or something. Like
That's Duran Duran. That's the scientist that she's looking for.
Right. So Duran Duran, he gets, because I think every man in this movie pretty much gets like some kind of metaphorical or actual sex scene with Barbarella, and he is meant to be evil. And the way that he shows that he's evil is he can't make love to her directly. He's putting her in this pleasure machine, and he's going to pleasure her to death. And then she breaks the machine with her purity and natural vagina or whatever.
But this movie, and I keep saying innocence because she is.
That's what they literally say in the movie.
Yeah, they say
you destroyed the machine with your innocence.
And then later there's this. The evil people get their power for something called the Matmos. The Matmos.
Also a band, just like Duran Duran.
And it should kill her when they eventually let it take over and engulf the planet. It should kill her, but instead it forms a bubble around her so that she survives and floats. And the Black Queen tells her that it's because of her innocence. The Matmos created this bubble as a protection from her innocence. So, but she's also very sexual. The whole movie is really about love and sex.
Oh yeah, and it's definitely part of that like neo-romanticism that overtook people after. And I mean, granted, like a period, because periods of romanticism aesthetically have always followed periods of great technological disruption. The original romanticists, the original romantic poets only really started glamorizing and writing nostalgically about nature. I'm talking about like Wordsworth, Shelley. Frankenstein is a book about romanticizing nature, essentially. All that stuff only happens after the Industrial Revolution, when the technology starts to look very ugly and just sort of ugly and manipulative and anti-human. You read literature from before that point, and the thing is that, like, I think what McLuhan said that nostalgia or expressions of nostalgia are the surest sign that a thing is dead, right? Because, like, you're not getting nostalgic about something that's still there. So the Romantics, they start inventing this kind of, like, buffet-style version of what nature is. Most writing about nature before that period, like, people like parts of it, but there's also the sense of, like, oh, shit, we don't... nature is also floods and things that can just destroy us. You don't start getting this sense of like, oh, nature is our mother, and it's sort of the absent mother that we always dream about but can never actually go back to. The thing Rousseau's thinking about oh God, do you ever read Rousseau's Confessions?
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No.
You know who Rousseau is.
Yeah.
Right.
So anyways.
So the Romantic period, you don't start having people getting nostalgic or incredibly romantic about this very specific idea of nature until after you hit the point of industrialization, where there is this sense that we do have the technological power to meet our most basic needs in most, if not all, situations. And then you don't have the second period of neo-romanticism, which I would definitely classify like any of the non-political aspects of the hippie movement as being essentially neo-romantic. I think out of a lot of like anxiety about the atomic bomb, because I mean, certainly the bomb, it's like this huge like cloud over everything cinematically in comic books and literature for like the next 20, 30 years. And yeah, you start getting these ideas. But the thing is, with the neo-romanticism, society has already moved so far from nature as like unmediated man-meeting thing that man cannot control or is not created, right? Like most people now, if they say like, oh, I'm going to nature, they're going to a state park. They're going to a designed environment that has trees in it. That's the definition of nature. Mm-hmm. Or they're like going to some area between, like an undeveloped area between a couple suburban housing tracks. They're not going into...
We're going to the park across the street. Hey, it's nature.
Right.
Look, there's grass.
Yeah, and I think this film is very much an outgrowth of that, in the sense that it's because I'm not against nature or the idea of nature. What I am against is sort of ideas that any kind of intellectual engagement with anything are tantamount to leaving nature, right? Like it's seen as this betrayal of the abstract idea of nature, in the same sense that like eating the apple of knowledge is the abstract betrayal of God that throws you out of the Garden of Eden. I mean, a lot of this stuff comes down to honestly, a lot of intellectual movements come down to people thinking that they discovered the Garden of Eden story for the umpteenth time. And to go back to Rousseau, yeah, like his idea of how society starts is very much a fall from Eden story. Derrida's theory of language is very much a fall from Eden story. The problem is that we can never access Eden. Eden is always an abstract concept, so we're basically saying, I'm afraid of dealing in abstract concepts because I've created this kind of King Kahuna abstract concept that gives me like weird stares when I look, like the bigger idea always kind of looks at you like a really jealous lover or something, right?
Wait, no, I don't understand. What do you mean the bigger idea in this context?
A bigger idea of God, nature.
Okay. No, those are good.
Or I mean, property in some case. I wouldn't put Marx into that category because Marx never posits like a beginning of man narrative.
So what do you mean it's a jealous lover?
Well, so there's a possibility that things could be good about just sex as we found it after evolution, or whenever people started like doing it. And there could also be positives to technological folds in sex. Also, the idea that like man broadly creating technological folds in sex is also its own kind of weird natural, right? Because you go back in history, there's a lot of very old records, pictures, things like that of people using things that look like sex toys or essentially technological implements of sex. So you end up with this kind of unintentional circular logic, right? You're equating. This is a very complicated subject.
I think it might be too complicated for Barbarella or for our discussion here. Yeah. Wait, so let's backtrack.
Yeah, let's backtrack. Yeah, I guess if you guys want to hear more of that, there's probably more of that, and I can prepare notes next time, so it takes a lot less.
We could do that as a bonus episode, as an Anno Mini. Maybe a very long Anno Mini, but at least as a bonus episode, as opposed to not a. Or we could find a movie that might be more in tune with the themes.
I mean, I guess it's because it's such a simple, like ideologically simple movie versus say Listomania. Listomania, there's a lot of very complicated attitudes about sex in a variety of forms. Barbarella, if you're taking it apart in any way intellectually, you run into this problem of everything has been oversimplified to the point where you can't make arguments with or against the movie. You can basically just situate the movie in a much larger historical context, which is probably spending more time trying to get back to Barbarella than you really want to take when you're talking about a movie that's essentially about Jane Fonda's boobs.
Well, it might if like the movie reflects at least for part of the population the attitudes of people at the time, and so it's situated in society as a whole. It reflects it somewhat, at least a subsection of it. But the movie isn't saying anything beyond sex and love are good, and
there's some kind of underlying paranoia about technology.
Right. Although even which might be
the nature thing's tied up with theology, right? Because she has to be saved by an angel.
Yeah, and even though he's the last of an alien race, he refers to himself as an angel.
Right. And I mean, the other weird thing is that if she's the only one who can have sex with him, and he is a supernatural being of the theological type, and they keep saying like, oh, it's because of your innocence at the end, the implication is that she's the Virgin Mary.
Well, no, but this breaks down
capacity.
This breaks down the Madonna whore complex, right? This is saying you don't have you. It's not that you can be Madonna or whore. It's that you can be Madonna and whore. you can be something that captures the qualities of both, and so you could just be a person. You could just be woman,
right? So long as you look like Jane Fonda.
Yeah. If you don't look like Jane Fonda, if you don't, who looks like us. Well, I wouldn't say supermodel, but a model.
She's like,
if you don't look like that, then good luck. Then we've got two categories for you.
Right, because you do have like anybody who's not in this sort of hyper gorgeous by the sexual standards of the time look. They're completely desexualized, or it's seen as a perversion, right? Like they're engaging in some low level physiognomy.
Keep going.
So like Duran Duran, he looks pretty fucking weird compared to the other people in the movie.
Right.
When she lands in the labyrinth, right? The weird guy with that ends up fixing her spaceship that has like the double tumbler on his head.
Who he looks like an old satyr,
Right.
except that he has human legs, not goat legs.
And given the language the film has established up to that point, when we see her interact with this guy, we immediately presume, oh, she's going to have sex with this guy. But no, I mean, we have to wait for this like traditionally ruggedly handsome man who happens to have wings to show up.
Yeah.
That's who she's going to have sex with. So the other guy is effectively, his sexuality may as well be the weird little double tumbler sticking off the top of his head.
So he's an exhibitionist because he's having he's having sex in front of everyone.
Or also the Black Queen. She's got this very phallic, in a Ken Russell movie, I would presume it was meant to be a penis, but this is a Roger Vadim movie. We know that she's evil because she's still pretty hot because she's got this giant phallic horn coming out of her head, which means she's impure, right? Also, there's the whole religious symbolism about horns and everything. But at the same time, I think that does encapsulate a lot of the problems with second wave feminism, because second wave feminism was a lot of the reason why intersectionality needed to be invented, because you had these people writing what they claimed were like quote unquote feminist texts where they said, like, the way that you self-actualize as a woman is hire a maid, right? And like, what if the maid's a woman?
Wait, what?
No, I swear to God, there's books from the late 60s where it's literally saying, like, you need to self-actualize as a woman. The way you become liberated as a woman is get your rich husband to hire you a maid.
Actually, no, you know what? No, that's a really good point. Thank you. I didn't realize that was so explicit, because the notion that, there's the notion that what holds back women across the world,
and sexism when class is also class and race or other factor, or there's a lot of text where it's saying, like, oh, you need to let the white female vanguard go first, and then we'll come back for you black ladies later. Right.
First wave feminism was definitely a white movement, and fairly racist. Right. So second wave feminism had its own
issues. Yeah.
But okay, no. Now remembering, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to say this as succinctly as I should, and I can actually go look up exactly what I'm thinking of, and maybe I can send a link to it. But that women's inability to work actually, and that they can't leave the house is what holds them back, or what holds them back from succeeding to the same level of men, and the solution to that is to find help, to find childcare, so to find nannies and babysitters, and to find housekeeping, so somebody else to clean your house. So it's actually what you're describing. So there's businesses that are modeled around this.
Oh yeah, tons of them.
Yeah. So this isn't. It sounded so. What you're describing sounded so.
During the day, a lot of these people I'm walking dogs for, like they're by and large very nice people. But it's not like they live in giant houses. They have a lot of money. If they did not have this money, they would be walking their own dog. Like, I am part of. I mean, granted, I'm not a woman, so I'm not being oppressed as a woman specifically in that situation. But there are a lot of female dog walkers, and it's kind of like, oh, okay. In order for you to go self-actualize or go have your tennis lessons or whatever, somebody lower on the ladder has to be doing this shit for you, basically. Right. Yeah.
The maid is a woman, so then what? Or it's the housekeeper has kids, so who's taking care of her kids? Or the nanny has kids, so who's taking care of her kids? And so
right, and then you just end up with a mirror of the larger issues, and you can also end up with quote unquote progressive politics as a way to avoid larger elephants in the room. I was discussing this with Liz actually earlier with like a lot of how Barack Obama was used in public discourse. I mean, he was used as a cudgel to kind of like beat black people over the head with the idea of like, see, there's a black president, racism doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, racism is over.
Right, we're in a post-racial America, right? B,
I don't see color.
right, right, and like to go another step.
I hate that phrase.
You have this issue of, okay, well, and I think this is a lot of how identity politics was being used for a while before everybody realized, this is like a couple of assholes trying to do a divide and conquer kind of thing, because they realized that the economy's gone to shit enough where there's going to be angry crowds with pitchforks soon. They're using the identity politics to obscure class politics, because class politics, identity politics, you can sort of talk about in the United States, right? Like maybe more so with race, just because you have the giant example of slavery, right? Everybody learns about slavery, so they have some sense like, okay, there was like some really fucked up racism stuff going on in this country. It's a little bit harder to talk about that with feminist issues, just because you're not really taught about domestic labor as being a form of slavery, and granted, it was not the same thing as chattel slavery. Class issues, nobody wants to talk about that, because the second you start talking about class, nobody wants to start talking about it until there's enough people that are hungry or they have these giant medical bills, because it implicates them, right? Like the second you start talking about relative comfort with people, anybody who's, thinks of themselves as middle class, and like everybody in the United States thinks of themselves as middle class, even if they're like struggling paycheck to paycheck, they start feeling really guilty. And they start feeling like, okay, I can't do anything about this. And also, if I start thinking like this, then I can't ever get ahead. My employer's not going to like me thinking like this. And so it's taken a very long time to have a frank discussion about how class figures into U.S. politics. I mean, there's also the fact of like this Protestant ethics shit that's been like baked into our heads for literally since the founding of the country, of like, if you're struggling, it's a sign of inherent laziness and the fact that God doesn't like you, right? It's a Protestant ethic. That's the thing that Weber's describing in that book.
And some sort of moral turpitude.
Right, like this idea, that God is making his will manifest on earth as we live in the form of you being wealthy or poor. Mm-hmm. And if you're poor, you did something to deserve it, as opposed to, human systems being put in place essentially to create a permanent underclass to provide low-cost labor to some other class.
But Dan, the meek shall inherit the earth.
Right.
I don't understand. It's stated outright. It was like out there was a hill and whatever else, and meek shall inherit the earth. So this is so confusing.
Right. Well, I thought with the identity politics, one of the weirdest things I noticed about that, because the identity politics stuff didn't really start to blow up until a little bit after Occupy Wall Street, and it turned into a reverse privilege system. It became kind of like what Nietzsche was talking about in Genealogy of Morals, with Christ reversing the idea of morality. You have suddenly everybody's fighting over this idea, especially at I don't want to mention it, but a certain liberal arts college that I've had a lot of dealings with over the years that may or may not be on the East Coast. Everybody's jockeying for this status of being the least privileged or most oppressed, right? Because that means that it's the only thing that eventually absolves you of symbolic guilt socially. And they're all fighting over this stuff. At the same time, some impoverished guy with mental problems comes up to him on the subway, and they immediately think, that guy's being sexist. And maybe he is, but you definitely got more privilege than that guy.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. I'm sure we'll get some hate mail for this.
I am sure we're going to get some hate mail for this.
Yeah.
I've kind of gone into manifesto mode, which is just not never.
Yeah, at this point, you've become a reactionary, haven't you? No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, I totally understand what you're saying. Yeah. I'm saying that out of context.
The important thing is not to necessarily worry about your own personal privilege or the ways that you're unprivileged, but to approach the world in a way that is humble and allows for the possibility that you might not know what you're talking about. That's really all I've learned in 30 years.
So we say in a 2-hour-long, 2-hour-long episodes.
Well, I just
that last longer than
I
the
throw
movies.
it into the space capsule and it goes out into the internet.
And if somebody listens for more than a minute, great. somebody listens for more than 10, wow, this is just like we're blown away. So thank you for you people who have made it to 1 hour and 11 minutes as originally recorded. That's before the minor editing.
Director's cut.
This is the director's cut.
The director's cut is always the longer one, right?
By the way,
they always call it the director's cut at least. Like I can only think of like one or two.
Yeah, it's direct.
Yeah, like the director's cut of Blade Runner, I think, is slightly shorter than the original theatrical cut. But
is that the one that has the voiceover?
Yeah. So for the longest time, that was the only version, because I bought Blade Runner as like a 30-year-old VHS at Last Vestige Books or at Last Vestige Records, and they used to sell DVDs and said they're not there anymore. They used to be in upstate New York, and I didn't know there were different cuts, and I just put this thing on, and it's like really old VHS, so they hadn't even figured out the VHS stuff. I'm like, this movie looks like shit, and this voiceover is so fucking stupid. And I was like, why does anybody give a shit about this movie? Right. And I saw it later, like on a big screen with the right cut, and I was like, oh, okay, like it's a pretty interesting look at Los Angeles.
So I had not quite the reverse, a half reverse. So the first time I saw it was on a VHS tape, and I was like, this is not an unattractive. It's an unattractive film because I saw it on a small TV. Right. It is long. It is boring. I don't quite understand what's going on, and I'm not sure I'm interested enough to figure it out. And then later in college, I saw at a revival theater. Now that you told me the word, now I'll remember forever revival theaters, because I can name specific revival theaters I've been to and gone to regularly. Just not remembering the name. It's not like I'd never heard it before. I just can't remember. Anyways, the point was, so then I saw it at a revival theater when they were going around to give another. They must have had multiple cuts, because the one I saw was the one with the voiceover, and I liked that version better. And I was like, okay, now I'm not lost. Now I know exactly what's going on. Now, granted, it's kind of hard to get lost in that movie, but it was enough effort, and that's my laziness and moral turpitude. Which is indication that I'm going to hell.
That's one of the things I love about you, Ron, is you're the only person still using the phrase moral turpitude. Because I think it just, you make it roll off the tongue better.
Well, the second time around, the first time I wasn't sure how to pronounce turpitude. At least my tongue wasn't sure. My brain might have been, but yeah, tuperiti.
The only two places you're going to see that are Ron and the SATs.
And that's the end of part 1 of our discussion of Barbarella. Join us next time as we continue this discussion, possibly even finishing the plot.